Outside the SS rank spatial crack, chaos was erupting. A level 10 uprising was in full swing, with waves of mutant beasts pouring out, each deadlier than the last. Reinforcements from nearby zones were en route, but the situation was spiraling fast. The commander, feeling the pressure, made a gut-wrenching call. Pull back. Wait for backup. Back at the camp, intel finally came through on Lu Sheng. 19 years old? A top general already? One of the officers couldn't believe it. And he took out an entire squad of martial lunatics in one strike last week? The commander grimaced, trying to process the information. And he's from our Eastern Military District? He muttered in disbelief. He had no idea how to describe someone like Lu Sheng. But then, it hit him like a ton of bricks. Lu Sheng had gone in, alone, into that SS rank spatial crack. His stomach dropped. He hadn't stopped him. A wave of regret washed over him. He spun around, barking at his officer. Can we track him? The officer, looking grim, shook his head. No way, Commander. He smashed his comms wristband before going in. Even if we could track him, sending a rescue team now with a situation like this? Not happening. Damn it. The commander cursed under his breath, his frustration bubbling over. He slammed his fist on the nearby table, the thud echoing through the tense air. Lu Sheng, a prodigy destined for greatness, maybe even martial saint status, and now he was trapped. And it was all thanks to that Dongxingyi. If not for their connections with the transcendent martial saint, the commander would have gladly taught that guy a lesson. Still fuming, he clenched his fists tighter. A nearby officer, flinching slightly at the commander's outburst, leaned in and whispered, "No offense, Commander, but you couldn't take Dongxingyi in a fight. The guy's ruthless." The commander grumbled, but didn't argue. The officer was right. After all, that didn't make it sting any less. Right now, he needed a plan B. Something drastic. "What's the plan?" the officer asked, wary of the answer. The commander's jaw clenched. "Nuke the damn place. Blow those beasts straight to hell, and then send in a rescue team to mop up." The officer's eyes widened in shock. "A nuke? Commander, are you sure? Even if HQ approves it." "Sure." The commander cut him off, eyes blazing. "What other choice do we have? At this rate, it'll take half a month, maybe longer, to stop the uprising. We don't have time for that." The officer hesitated, the weight of the situation sinking in. "But Commander, a nuke could widen the fissure. We'd risk letting even stronger beasts through, turning this into a catastrophe. Half the SSS level spatial cracks on this planet were created because other countries made the same mistake." Silence hung between them as the gravity of the officer's words set in. The commander slammed his fist down on the table, frustration boiling over. "So, we can't nuke them. We can't send a team in, damn it." His anger was palpable, but deep down, he couldn't just sit idly by and let Lu Sheng die. Not for the Eastern Military District, not for humanity's future. He had to take action, even if it was a risk he'd have to shoulder alone. He opened his mouth to speak, but before any words could escape, an officer burst into the command center, panting and wide-eyed. "Commander!" he shouted, barely catching his breath. "The situation has changed." Everyone turned to face him. His panic slowly melted into a smile as he reported, "The beasts, they're retreating. They're pulling back toward the spatial crack." The commander froze, processing the sudden twist. "Pull up the satellite images now," he barked. Within seconds, the screens blinked to life, showing the battlefield in real time. Sure enough, the tide of monstrous beasts that had been overwhelming their forces was now reversing, retreating en masse toward the spatial crack. But something didn't sit right. "This isn't just a retreat," the commander muttered, eyes narrowing. "It's like they're rushing back to protect something. Or maybe, stop something." The weight of his words sank into the room. The officer's relief quickly turned to shock as the images on the screen grew more frantic. The beasts were scrambling, like they were terrified of whatever was coming from the depths of the spatial crack. And then it happened. From the center of the spatial crack, a golden light erupted. The entire battlefield was bathed in its radiant glow. In the blink of an eye, a massive beast on the front lines was decapitated, its head severed with surgical precision. Before anyone could process what had just happened, a phoenix, made entirely of golden flames, burst from the ground, soaring into the sky. Its fiery presence incinerated any remaining beasts, wiping them out in an instant. For a moment, the entire battlefield was silent. Every soldier, every commander stood frozen in awe, their eyes locked on the scene before them. It was a sight none of them would forget for the rest of their lives. Among the smoldering remains of the fallen beasts, Lu Shang descended calmly to the ground, cradling Dong Qingxue in his arms. The phoenix didn't disappear. Instead, it hovered above him, its fierce eyes glaring at the surviving beasts, who cowered in fear, letting out anxious cries from a distance. Lu Shang glanced down at Dong Qingxue, who was still unconscious, and muttered to himself, "These beasts are way too loud." As if that settled it, Lu Shang stepped into the air, his feet landing softly on the back of the hovering phoenix. The soldiers on the ground watched in stunned disbelief. Flying, that was the stuff of legends. Sure, some grandmasters could achieve it, but they were the elite, those on the cusp of becoming martial saints. And yet, Lu Shang, only 19 years old, was doing it with effortless grace. A few flying beasts, sensing the opportunity, appeared in front of him, roaring as they charged. Lu Shang gave them a cold, disinterested look. In the next second, lightning struck from the heavens, obliterating the beasts before they could even get close. Their lifeless bodies fell to the ground, smoldering in the aftermath of his power. Lu Shang turned toward the beasts, calmly raised a finger to his lips, and made a simple gesture. "If they keep making noise," he said with an icy smile, "I'll wipe them all out." As if understanding him perfectly, the beasts below fell silent, the tension in the air palpable. A moment later, they broke ranks, fleeing in every direction like a panicked swarm. The commander stood there, speechless. Fire, wind, lightning. Lu Shang had mastery over multiple elements. He gulped, his mind racing with one thought. Just how powerful is this kid? How did he become this strong? Even now, Lu Shang carried Dong Qingxue effortlessly in his arms. Was this really all for her? Was this whole rampage through the depths of that hellish spatial crack a man enraged for the sake of a woman? "Isn't that Dong Shangyi's sister?" one of the officers muttered, piecing it together. And wait, wasn't Lu Shang's coat draped over her just a few moments ago? How was he wearing it again? Either way, that wasn't important now. The commander snapped out of his daze, realizing the golden opportunity before him. With a booming laugh, he gave the order, "Launch the counterattack. Hit the spatial crack with everything we've got." Cheers erupted through the ranks as the soldiers, emboldened by Lu Shang's overwhelming display of power, surged forward, weapons ready. Meanwhile, outside the command tent, Dong Shangyi stood silently, hearing the soldiers' laughter and cheers. His gaze turned toward the horizon, and there, he saw him, Lu Shang, walking toward him, carrying Dong Qingxue in his arms. Dong Shangyi wanted to call out her name, to rush over, but before he could, Lu Shang shot him a cold glance, silencing him. "She's finally asleep," Lu Shang said, his tone firm but low. "Don't wake her." As Lu Shang strode past him, Dong Shangyi swallowed hard and quietly muttered, "Thank you. Thank you for saving her." Without even stopping, Lu Shang replied over his shoulder, "Don't think a simple thank you means I won't beat you up." His voice was steady, filled with that unshakable confidence. "Like I said before, your martial path is finished, and I'll be the one to make sure of it. So get ready. In the military tournament, I'm not holding back." Dong Shangyi stood frozen, watching Lu Shang walk away, the weight of those words settling over him like a cold shadow. What felt like an eternity later, Dong Qingxue slowly opened her eyes, her body trembling, beads of cold sweat clinging to her forehead. Her gaze darted around the room, her mind still foggy as if waking from a nightmare. It didn't take long before her eyes found Lu Shang, sitting nearby, watching over her. He smiled softly at her, and for a moment, the panic in her chest subsided. "I had a dream," she murmured, her voice soft and shaky. "A dream that you came for me, that you saved me." Lu Shang's smile grew warmer, though he didn't say a word. Dong Qingxue blinked, a faint blush rising to her cheeks as the memories of the spatial crack flashed through her mind. He really did come for me, she thought. He had promised, and he had kept that promise. "Anne," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "you said you'd bring me back." Lu Shang looked a little awkward, clearing his throat softly. Well, maybe that wasn't a dream. Maybe it really happened. Dong Qingxue stared at him, trying to piece together the fragments of her blurry memories. Slowly, it dawned on her. It was real. She turned her head slightly, her voice barely above a whisper, "Thank you." Her words, though simple, carried a sincerity that made the atmosphere more awkward. Lu Shang hesitated, unsure of how to respond. Just moments ago, Dong Qingxue had clung tightly to him, refusing to let go. But now, out of the danger of the spatial crack, The air between them had shifted. The formality in her voice made it feel like they were suddenly distant again. A gentle breeze blew through the hospital room, causing the curtains to flutter. The room fell into an almost uncomfortable quiet. Lu Sheng sat on the edge of the bed, glancing at Dong Qingxue. After a long pause, they both spoke at the same time. Dong Qingxue, Lu Sheng. Their eyes met, and a small, shared laugh broke the tension. Dong Qingxue motioned for Lu Sheng to go first, looking a little nervous. Lu Sheng cleared his throat again, trying to gather his courage. Do you want to grab a meal sometime? Dong Qingxue nodded, her smile soft. Okay. Feeling a surge of confidence, Lu Sheng continued, and maybe, after dinner, we could watch a movie? Another nod. Okay. His hand, resting on the edge of the bed, inched closer to hers. And after the movie, maybe we could take a walk? Dong Qingxue's smile grew a little as she nodded once more, saying softly, sure. Lu Sheng's heart raced. His hand was now just barely brushing against hers. He gathered his breath and asked, and after the walk, maybe we could find a bar, have a drink? Dong Qingxue kept nodding, though her voice grew quieter as she felt his hand close around hers. Her cheeks flushed pink as she turned her head slightly, hiding her face. Lu Sheng leaned in just a little closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. And how about spending the new year at my place? Dong Qingxue blinked, nodding out of reflex. But then, the realization hit her. Wait, what? Her eyes widened in disbelief, turning to Lu Sheng, who was already grinning, clearly pleased. Great. It's settled, then, he declared, sealing the deal. Once you're all better, I'll come to pick you up. Dong Qingxue's heart was racing, her face both flustered and embarrassed. Yet, somewhere beneath that, there was also a hint of joy. Lu Sheng noticed her blushing but didn't say anything. Instead, he gently tucked her in, making sure she was comfortable. The room fell quiet again, but this time, it was a soft, warm silence. Dong Qingxue could hear her own heartbeat thudding in her ears as she lay there, watching Lu Sheng out of the corner of her eye. As Lu Sheng stood up to leave, he turned to Dong Qingxue with one last reminder, make sure to get plenty of rest. His voice was soft, yet firm. Then, without waiting for a response, he left the room, the door closing quietly behind him. Dong Qingxue stared at the door, her eyes lingering where Lu Sheng had just disappeared. He really saved me. Lost in thought, she lay still for a long moment. The hospital room, now enveloped in silence, felt a little too quiet. An odd sense of emptiness crept in, filling the space where Lu Sheng's presence had been. Suddenly, the door opened again. Excited, Dong Qingxue sat up, thinking maybe Lu Sheng had come back. But instead, it was Lin Wanwan, bouncing into the room with her usual bright energy and a bouquet of colorful flowers. Glad to see you're finally awake, Wanwan chirped, placing the flowers on the bedside table with a wide grin. Dong Qingxue learned that she had been unconscious for an entire day and night. As she tried to wrap her head around the time she lost, Wanwan added with a playful grin, your boyfriend took care of you the whole time, you know? Dong Qingxue blushed, quickly turning her head away. What boyfriend? She mumbled quietly. Wanwan raised an eyebrow, her expression mischievous. Oh, he's not your boyfriend? But you sure don't act like he isn't. Dong Qingxue's face flushed even more, her cheeks burning bright red as Wanwan giggled. Seeing her friend so embarrassed, Wanwan finally relented and started explaining everything that had happened. She described how Lu Sheng had stormed into the SS-level spatial crack, alone, just to bring Dong Qingxue back. Wanwan, resting her chin in her hand, sighed dramatically. If anyone needs a boyfriend, they should definitely find one like Lu Sheng. Dong Qingxue, still flustered, glanced toward the door again, her heart skipping a beat. She nodded quietly, trying to hide the small smile forming on her lips. A day later, the chaos of the SS-level spatial crack uprising was officially over. It had come quickly, but it ended just as fast. The military's counteroffensive completely crushed the remaining beasts. The commander's triumphant face made the front page of the news, hailed as the hero who led the charge. But Lu Sheng's role? Barely a mention. Just a few lines hidden away in the footnotes of the paper. Still, his nickname, the blazing son of the military, was starting to spread. People in the Eastern Military District were quietly buzzing about him, calling him the brightest star rising through the ranks. Not that Lu Sheng cared much. Sure, the idea of solo charging into a spatial crack might sound epic, but his real goal had been simple: save Dong Qingxue. Personal glory wasn't his style. Heroism on the battlefield was fleeting, and there were bigger responsibilities to uphold. Besides, he had his own reward. Sitting comfortably in his account now was a cool 10 million military merits, courtesy of the mission. On top of that, the military had returned every last piece of dense gold he had recovered from the other spatial crack. Nothing missing. And as a cherry on top, Lu Shang had been awarded the prestigious Diamond Dragon Pattern Military Medal, personally presented by the Marshal himself. While ensuring Dong Qingxue slept peacefully, Lu Shang had unintentionally revealed more of his powers than he ever meant to. He knew for certain now that he'd drawn attention, far too much, but at this point, he couldn't even recall how many of his abilities he'd used. All he knew was that the beasts within the spatial crack had gone completely berserk, desperately trying to trap him inside. Even for someone of his caliber, it had nearly drained him. By the time he finally broke free, exhaustion weighed heavy on him. Exhaustion, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. With nature's breathing technique and immortal cells, the idea of running out of energy seemed impossible. But here he was. People always said only martial saints could survive a full-scale uprising inside an SS-level spatial crack. Did this mean Lu Shang was now comparable to a 9th-level martial saint? He shook his head, quickly dismissing the thought. A 9th-level martial saint was a being who could manipulate the very energy of heaven and earth itself. That kind of power was an unstoppable force, far beyond anything he could fathom right now. At the end of the day, human strength had limits, but the power of nature did not. To challenge the vast forces of heaven and earth, Lu Shang was not there yet. Still, he couldn't ignore the fact that his potential was growing at an insane rate. His path had long diverged from that of the average martial artist. He hadn't even broken through to the great grandmaster level yet. Yet, as he thought about it, Lu Shang realized that the traditional martial rankings were becoming less and less relevant to him. His power, his abilities, and his understanding had gone far beyond what most would consider the norm. But one thing was clear. He knew the heaven and earth bridges were something he'd have to master someday. He could feel it deep within his bones. His next breakthrough was approaching, and fast. With the military merits and dense gold he had acquired, now might be the perfect time to push himself even further. As he sat quietly, contemplating his next move, the soft sound of footsteps echoed through the room. A maid entered, bowing slightly as she informed him that everything he had requested was ready. Lu Shang nodded, rising from his chair. But just as he was about to leave, a strange thought crossed his mind. He turned to the maid and, out of nowhere, asked her, "What do you think I should wear for meeting someone important?" The maid quickly caught on, her eyes sparkling with amusement. Knowing full well that Lu Shang was preparing for a date, she smiled knowingly and added, "The 5 suits on the right side of the wardrobe should do nicely. If I understand Lady Dong Qingxue correctly, I think she'd appreciate one of those." Lu Shang raised an eyebrow, slightly surprised. "You know Dong Qingxue's taste that well?" The maid covered her mouth, chuckling softly. Who doesn't know Lady Dong Qingxue by now? After all, the entire Eastern Military District has heard about its brightest star storming into a spatial crack full of beasts, for the sake of a certain special someone. She grinned. Right now, every woman in the district is envying her. Lu Shang couldn't help but smile at her words, but something came to mind, and his expression grew more serious. Casually, he asked, "By the way, I've noticed an old comrade of parents has been visiting you quite frequently. Everything okay with that?" The maid's face immediately shifted, fear flickering in her eyes before she quickly lowered her gaze. He's been pursuing me," she stammered, her voice trembling slightly, "asking me to marry him." Lu Shang was taken aback for a moment, his curiosity piqued as he gave her a long, thoughtful look. He didn't press the issue, though, simply nodding and dismissing her with a wave of his hand. As the maid left the room, Lu Shang's smile faded, and his eyes narrowed slightly. He knew she was lying. Something wasn't right, and the subtle fear in her voice confirmed it. He couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that there was more to the situation than she was letting on. But for now, he had other things to focus on.